The last glimpse of Jean Kent captures her framed by a half-drawn curtain, one eye in light, the other swallowed by shadow. Once the jewel of British cinema, she was elegance shaped into human form, the star who made danger look divine. But behind that serenity lay something deeper, something unsaid. She was famous for playing women who hid truths behind charm. Yet as the decades passed, whispers began to sound eerily familiar that Jean Kent herself was living one of those stories. Colleagues spoke of her caution, her quiet glances, her strange ability to vanish from a room without moving at all. Then, at the height of her fame, she disappeared. No scandal, no farewell, only the kind of silence that feels intentional. When she was later found alone in her Suffolk home, the press called her the forgotten star. But perhaps she hadn't been forgotten. Perhaps she had chosen to remember what others wanted erased. What secret did she take with her into that silence, and who was afraid of it being told? After World War II, Britain's film industry stood on uncertain ground, eager to rebuild its identity and pride. Amid the smoke and rubble of London's recovery, a new generation of stars emerged, polished, disciplined, unshakably British. Among them was Jean Kent, born Joan Mildred Summerfield in 1921, a dancer-turned-actress who embodied the post-war nation's delicate balance between grace and grit. Her transformation under the rank organization was cinematic in itself. They shaped her image into the perfect starlet, alluring but proper, intelligent yet untouchable. Through films like Caravan, Good Time Girl, and the Browning version, Jean became the face of ambition wrapped in secrecy. Her characters were women of elegance and risk reflections, perhaps of something real within her. Audiences adored her poise, her voice, her control. But insiders noticed something else. She was a listener. She observed. And in a world where power depended on ignorance, her awareness was unsettling. She always seemed to know when a lie was being told, one director later said. By the mid-1950 seconds, her rise ended as abruptly as it began. The studios that once built her legend now refused to say her name. She had played many roles, but the one that lasted longest was silence. What did Jean Kent hear in those rooms that made silence her only defense? Jean Kent's beginnings were woven from the remnants of show business. Born to parents who lived by the rhythm of the stage, she spent her childhood behind velvet curtains, where illusion and survival walked hand in hand. Her first applause came not from cinema, but from dance halls, the smoky, dimly lit rooms of wartime London, where she learned to hold an audience with nothing but her presence. By 16, she was already performing in musical revues, her movements sharp, her gaze steady. She wasn't the loudest or most flamboyant on stage, but she carried something rarer: stillness. When a talent scout from rank organizations saw her, he recognized that kind of stillness, the kind that draws a lens like gravity. Jean's film debut felt inevitable. Beneath the bright studio lights of denim, she faced the camera with unflinching calm. Her first major role in It Always Rains on Sunday, 1947, revealed a performer who didn't just act emotions but contained them, holding back just enough to make audiences ache for more. Critics called her the woman who speaks with her eyes. Within a few short years, she had become one of Britain's most bankable stars. Her elegance carried the promise of glamour in a recovering nation, while her restraint gave her an edge no script could write. She was magnetic, not for what she revealed, but for what she refused to show. But fame, as she would soon learn, has a way of asking for more than it gives, and some lights, once turned on, never let you rest in the dark again. With every film, Jean Kent became less a person and more an idea, the poised, enigmatic woman Britain longed to believe in. The rank organization promoted her face as the face of post-war resilience, the triumph of order over chaos. But behind the elegance was exhaustion. Each photo shoot, each public appearance, chipped away at her privacy until she existed only as a reflection of what others needed her to be. Her colleagues adored her professionalism, yet sensed the distance. She smiled, she charmed, but rarely revealed herself. The more the world demanded access, the deeper she withdrew. They only see what they want to see, she once murmured on set, almost to herself. That's how it works, doesn't it? At the studio's grand parties, she was present but detached, sipping her drink, observing as power danced between men in tailored suits. She listened to conversations others ignored, watching the way careers were made or destroyed with a single sentence. She knew when to leave the room, one producer later recalled. But she always knew what was said before she did. The attention that had once been flattering now felt suffocating. She began turning down interviews, avoiding photographers, declining scripts that cheapened her image. It was a dangerous move in a business that equated silence with defiance. Jean Kent had learned too much about the machinery that built and broke stars. And in a world that thrived on illusion, truth was never welcome for long. Her decline was not dramatic, it was deliberate. One day, she was the face of British cinema. The next, her name vanished from headlines as if erased by design. No public feud, no scandal, only absence. It was as though the curtain had fallen mid-scene, leaving the audience to wonder why the story stopped. Some whispered about a confrontation at a studio party, a disagreement that reached too high up the rank organization's chain of command. Others said she had overheard something meant never to reach the ears of an actress. No one knew for certain, and Jean never offered an explanation. Her silence became the rumor's fuel. Letters to friends hinted at resignation, cloaked in wisdom. The industry keeps what it needs and discards what it fears. She accepted it without bitterness, almost with relief. After years of performing for a world that demanded perfection, she finally let herself disappear. Producers moved on. Critics forgot. But her absence haunted the corridors of Denham Studios. People spoke her name softly, as if afraid to wake a ghost. The same woman who had once captivated a nation with her composure had turned that composure into a shield, her final, unbreakable role. Jean Kent's greatest act was not her rise, but her retreat. She didn't fall from fame. She stepped away from it quietly, purposefully, leaving behind a silence that no spotlight could ever reach. Jean Kent's final act unfolded far from London studios in the calm, muted corners of Suffolk, where the air smelled of rain and dusted film reels. She lived with her husband, actor Just Sargent, in a small cottage whose windows rarely opened. After his passing, the silence deepened. She didn't chase nostalgia or attempt a comeback. The woman who once commanded the screen now lived among shadows of her own choosing. Neighbors recalled brief sightings, a glimpse of her at the window, a slow walk to the mailbox, the faint flicker of a projector at night. It was said she sometimes watched her old films alone, the light painting her walls with younger versions of herself. In that glow, she was eternal again, untouched by time or expectation. When journalists wrote to her, she seldom replied. When they arrived at her door, she turned them away. "I've already said everything I needed to," she once wrote. But people never listened to silence. Her restraint was not loneliness, it was authorship. The same precision that guided her performances now defined her life. No wasted words, no unnecessary scenes. In 2013, when news broke that she had passed away after a fall at home, the headlines called her the last of the rank starlets. Yet even in death, Jean Kent remained elusive, remembered, but never fully understood. Her departure was quiet, yes, but it carried a strange defiance, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful endings are the ones written without witnesses. Jean Kent's legacy lives not in fame's echo, but in its refusal. She belonged to an age that celebrated glamour yet punished authenticity, and she outsmarted it by vanishing before it could consume her. Watching her now, decades later, is to feel her quiet rebellion flicker from within each frame. In Good Time Girl and the Browning version, her characters walk the knife's edge between vulnerability and command, mirroring the woman behind the performance. Film historians have begun to revisit her work with new respect. They see that what once looked like restraint was in fact resistance. Her silence, misunderstood in her time, reads now as strength, a refusal to play the endless game of exposure. Jean Kent turned invisibility into legacy, dignity into rebellion. She left no tell-all interviews, no memoirs, no desperate grasp for relevance. And yet, the absence speaks louder than confession. She reminds us that stars are not immortal because of what they say, but because of what they withhold. Jean Kent didn't just vanish from the light, she redefined what it means to control your own story. Her silence endures as both mystery and message. Sometimes the truest legacy is the one protected, not performed. Jean Kent's journey captures the haunting duality of every performer, the brilliance the world celebrates, and the burden it never sees. She was both muse and mirror, a woman whose artistry reflected the fragile architecture of fame itself. When others sought immortality through exposure, she found hers in silence. Her story is not one of tragedy, but of control. She mastered the frame, and when it could no longer contain her truth, she stepped beyond it. In doing so, she became something rarer than a legend. She became a question. Decades later, her name still carries an aura of quiet defiance, her gaze frozen in film stills that seem to watch us back. Jean Kent reminds us that behind every spotlight lies a shadow, and sometimes the shadow holds more truth than the light ever could. In the end, she didn't fade. She simply refused to perform for a world unworthy of her secrets. Her story lingers, whispered between the reels of forgotten film and the silence she left behind. Jean Kent may have walked away from the spotlight, but her presence still flickers in every frame, every pause, every question she never answered. Which of her performances still haunts you? And what do you think she chose to protect in her silence? Share your thoughts, keep her legacy alive, and subscribe for more untold stories that live between fame and shadow.